Now we move to the next speaker, that is Claudia Schnugg. That I thank you so much for be here today, Claudia. Claudia is a well-known of the STARTS community that is very active. So we can see her in LinkedIn channel of STARTS event initiatives. She is very present and is a good to have you here today. And you are an ArtScience advocate, a consultant, a researcher, a curator, but you introduce yourself after. And you are working soon to methods for related to news, mapping the news, and it's quite. I'm very curious. It seems quite interesting as this JECT-SENSE project. So I give you the floor, Claudia.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me and inviting me. I will start share my screen. So thanks again for inviting me and for your nice words for the introduction. I will talk about the JECT-SENSE project that I worked on and realized with the project partners earlier this year, and we are still actually working on this. And I will start a little bit with an introduction also to my my other work. So yeah. This is me. I'm a researcher, as you said, coming from social science and economic science background, but also cultural science and art theory, and bringing this into the mix of this art science community, but also art and technology community. And I'm doing research myself. But I'm also working as a curator and working a lot with different organizations, helping them to realize these collaborations and help them to set up programs that fit their needs. So yeah, here this is one of the projects I'm working on right now. It's a traveling plant project, and here you see some books and other writings. So I always try to balance this practical and the theoretical part of my work. And I want just to quickly start a little bit into my theoretical work so that you also understand a little bit better how I approach them to talk about case studies and also other projects like the JECT-SENSE project that you'll hear about soon. So my main questions are, why do we need art and technology or art science collaboration, and what are the processes and what are the outcomes, and how to better understand them in terms of goals, impact, and process management to make them better collaboration processes, but also to understand better the impact. Because actually there is a lot of call for art and science, art and technology. For example, when we talk about interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, so there is somehow a common sense that we want this, but I think it's important that we need to understand what is the art especially bringing to that, and how can we understand the processes so that we are not really that much dependent on understanding just is one outcome or a specific outcome innovative. So in my work, I try to look at different kinds of impacts and outcomes and processes to better understand how to categorize them a little bit better from a more phenomenological perspective. So for example, what are we talking about? So are we talking about how disciplines come together and benefit from each other? Or is it the person that we are talking about? Are we talking about how we evolve our practice, or how we educate, or how we reach out to others? And then again, we have different ways of reaching out to audiences. So to expert audiences, general public engagement or general outreach, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we've got another layer that's very interesting especially when it comes to art and science collaboration or art and technology collaboration, that we hope and we also see that art also brings some kind of critical reflection and outside perspective. And I just very quickly, so these are somehow the main aspects of how I try to understand these processes, looking at what happens along the way, and also using a lot of my background from art theory, but also especially from social sciences, psychology, organizational theory, to better understand what happens between the people and how these processes can generate these very interesting outcomes. I won't go too much into detail here for creativity theory. This is just one example. So we have a lot of theory there, and we talk about art and science or art and technology about somehow enhancing creativity. So I really try to go into depth there and try to understand what happens between people when we look at, for example, creativity as state, as outcome, or as process, and how and where and how in the process between artists and scientists or artists and engineers, we can support them to be more creative, or we can support them to become more to inspire each other. And what are actually all these different aspects that we need to think of when we talk about creativity, and so that we're not disappointed when we bring artists and scientists together and then nothing happens. So it's really a specific kind of engagement. So there are several social theories that I've been working with, and you also mentioned my writing previously. So in my book, I looked at several case studies where I used these different aspects, for example, meaningful work theory, liminal spaces theory, sense giving and sense making, and to better understand what happens in specific art science projects, and how we can analyze it from these theoretical perspectives to make it better approachable for somebody who's not really that much into art science or art tech collaboration, and really needs to understand why it's beneficial if we don't have an immediate outcome. And in that sense, I'm just about to start another project on sense making, where I also work with movements and performance. So I was very much inspired. I found this really inspiring to hear Antonio's talk about his project, because it's also something that I think that there we can learn about how we can bring art and science together to understand better how we make sense of what we do, our work, our processes, and how we understand the world, and also to understand it from a more embodied perspective. And yes, as I said before, what I also think is very important about all this is that we always think, why is art so special in this dialogue between the disciplines? Because art is not just another discipline. It is something that has a very experiential and central quality, because it is based in aesthetics. Aesthetics is part of the method, and it's outside of the typical production logic of science and technology or product development. And it has a lot of processes that are different to typical scientific or engineering processes, because maybe you're familiar also with the design process, where you have analytical processes, and then you make you start to do more general research, and then go back to the analytical, and then open up with the synthetic process. And in the arts, you have a lot of these tools that you can work with and play with, and this is also very helpful when you are juxtaposing this with scientific or engineering processes. And then last but not least, arts is based and rooted in our culture and in society, but also in how we individually relate to it. So I think this gives it another dimension that's very interesting about the arts bring it into this collaborative space. But instead of going too much into these theoretical details, I wanted to go to the project that I announced to talk about. And yeah, it is the JECT-SENSE project, as you mentioned. It's and it's about news landscapes. And I want to give you a brief insight into this project by starting with a video.
Claudia, sorry, we can't really hear the out. No, we can't hear anything. Just we see the video going on, but we can't hear anything. Thank you.
You still can't hear it?
No, we just see the slides going on.
Because we just tested it the other day with the same features. So I just talked to it. So JECT-SENSE is this is artist Resakov, and before you saw the JECT-SENSE tool, and we work together to make news landscapes which are very diverse and difficult to access as a full landscape. And we try to do the 2D and the 3D visualization. Here you can see some of the 2D visualizations. And 3D visualizations initiated by the artists in this collaborative process, where the artists suggested some new ways of experimenting with machine learning to make 3D visualizations and to test them with journalists and editors. And maybe this is then not so interesting anymore. So I just go to my slides, to the next slides. So this project has been realized within, actually a little more than half a year, supported by the Media Futures program, which is a part of the STARTS programs, and it was calling for collaborations between startups and artists. And JECT-AI is a startup funded by computer scientists, actually a professor at the university in London, who has been exploring creativity tools, digital creativity tools for journalists, and founded JECT-AI as a tool for journalists to search outside the filter bubble and to really access new sources that they would not access with the typical ways of searching, and how algorithms are tuned, for example, on Google, how to search so that they show you what you would like to see, so that they really get a better overview instead. Anthony Yaishikov, who's a media artist, and me as a curator and supporter, and somehow also initiator of this collaboration. And we also wanted to do an artwork. And actually we started out with the idea of that we wanted to do an artwork to make this way of searching outside a filter bubble and experiencing a physical filter bubble visible to an audience. But as the support from Media Futures was also for this intense collaboration between artists and technology, we had the pleasure to also explore a broader approach and could also do other things. So we started out to have one process and 3 goals. So we wanted to do 2D visualizations for journalists for daily news updates. We wanted to do explore with 3D visualizations to have to reduce this multi-dimensional information of news landscapes into a 3-dimensional space that you can explore. And we wanted to do an artwork called Fragile Perspectives. And we were very successful in this short time frame. So we had 3 goals, but we had many more outcomes. And these outcomes actually are things that reflect back to what I said before about the processes and what happens between people and what happens when we bring together different perspectives, but also bringing the arts with their different processes. So yes, we had these three outcomes. We have an artwork, we have 2D mapping and 3D mapping, but we learned a lot about what editors and journalists need when they want to engage with news landscapes. We produced from this 2D mapping a real edition that's already in use in the JECT-AI application and already in the product. We had valuable additions to the backend of JECT-AI because the artists needed a lot of new categorizations for producing the artwork. So this JECT-SENSE database has more than 20 million articles in 6 languages, and we needed to categorize them for time when they were published. We needed to find a way around categorizing them in a way that we can still add categories that are not there yet, because news are, they are live, so we don't know what are tags that would be needed tomorrow. So there's a lot of things that needed to be added to the back end, which the scientists found out that is super important for them and super important for the product development. And maybe they would have done it in a year, but it would have been much more difficult. And then, yes, JECT-AI now plans to use these outcomes also in their advertisement and also to attract attention to the product. We found that instead of having the 3D mapping as a intuitive tool for editors, that we have a lot of research questions about how we read visualizations. So there are a few next steps planned there. Then we have, of course, a lot of learnings for everybody. So like, how can we collaborate and what does it do to us? And although we have one goal, we can learn much more. But also from the artistic side, for example, about the sonification technique and how to really understand how we can physically manifest data. And also we worked with some craftspeople and they also had some very interesting learnings. So we are now working on some scientific papers to talk about it. But I just quickly in the last few minutes wanted to show you a few more images. So here you can see JECT-AI originally was text-based. And now we have the opportunity to, for example, search and give a graphical overview. And this is some kind of the first 2D mapping. For example, what are related stories and how many of them are there, but also when they were published. And you can compare this over time and you can compare different tags. But you can also compare, for example, where have they been published, which is very interesting when you think about censorship in certain countries, or individual or populism or individual perspectives. So how are people from different countries and different backgrounds talking about the same issue? But also gender and ethnicity is a topic that we can now search for in the database, which is very helpful also for the journalists, and they appreciate a lot. And this is actually what we wanted to do and what we started to do for the 3D mapping. We tried to make a landscape of what has been, for example, published within a week, and how, here you can see it a bit. So how are these stories related? So are they, what is about, is there some relationship between these topics when people talk about the coronavirus or about vaccination, and but also about how they, if they live healthy. And then you can see the valleys and the hills, which also wanted to support some ideas about sentiment analysis. So how are people talking about these topics in a positive or in a more negative way? But this was not so interesting for the editors because they had a hard time to understand it. So we are now exploring this more from a, actually, again, more scientific perspective when we think about visualization and data visualization. And the next is actually going to the plan what we did for the artwork. So we did this, we plan to have the fragile perspectives where we have different physical representations of news landscapes, of articles published in the last 2 years on a specific topic, like, for example, climate change. And this is the process the artists use, which is also which is reflected in the 2D visualization. So we have the news queries from the database, and this is then the first outcome is then the 2D visualization, but this has then been processed by a machine learning system and extracted into this 3D map. Here, where we then did 3D printing to produce the gloss, but we also did the sonification, or the artist did the sonification, and a really interesting new sonification technique by scanning these the maps produced by the machine learning algorithm in order to create the soundscape of a specific news landscape. These were the themes that we talked about in this artwork. Here you can see the gloss production, which was very tricky. And the metal production was as tricky because we didn't know how to balance the glass in the metal ring. But finally, we ended up with a very interesting artwork, which is very beautiful to look at, but also to listen. And here you can see how the sonification of the different outcomes took place. And actually, they are now integrated into one landscape where each theme or each query on censorship, climate crisis, and so on is playing a virtual string, so that you somehow have the interplay of all these 5 themes, and you can hear it. This is how
Claudia, maybe you can try to remove your headphones.
Okay.
Maybe it would work. Just
okay.
To hear the sound of the video, if you wanted to put it on. Or...
Yeah, but if it doesn't work before, then it won't work now. So because it's the same. It's probably in the Zoom settings.
Okay, thank you anyway. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So I just jump over this, but I'm already past my time. So yeah. So the idea is to stand between the different sculptures and to hear them as well. And then also the vibration of the metal, because the loudspeakers are in the bottom, will vibrate the glass, so you really can also experience this tension. And this is the first. These are a few images of the first setup. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Very interesting, all the parts, both the part of the practical, the project, and I think that this is very challenging topic, the news, because we are full of news and we have fake news. We are it's very important to mapping, find a way, the method to map this, all this amount of data, and also from a point of view of user experience.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting to see how you can see how fragile the perspectives we have produced by the news are, and experience this kind of tension. And this is the artist's contribution then. Yes.
Yeah. So, and also interesting that theoric part that I already saw in your presentation before, that is how to the process of creativity is very interesting has been formulated. So something that is let me say scientific, but is creativity. Okay, so thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much.